This is what a late game TFT fight looks like. There is a lot going on here. It's pretty confusing looking, and I'm sure that you have a ton of questions. Well, you are in luck because we are going to slow it down and go right back to the beginning so that by the time you get to this point in the game, not only do you know exactly what's going on, but you will not be the 2-star 2-cost Zyra getting destroyed by the 2-star 5-cost Yasuo. Don't worry, all this terminology is going to make perfect sense very soon. So in this video, I am going to give you the 5 basic tips that you need to know if you're either starting TFT for the very first time, if you've played a little bit in set 7 or 7.5, or maybe back in a previous set, but you never really dedicated too much time to it, or if you just need a refresher on the basic mechanics so that you can maximize your time playing this wonderful game. The second and third tips are probably the most important ones I'm going to talk about, but in order for them to make the most sense, we are going to have to start at the beginning and go over tip 1, which basically is the framework of the game. Teamfight Tactics, or TFT for short, is an auto chess battling game. And what that means is you build a board of champions and then you will battle with other players, and the battle is simulated so the units are pre-programmed to do what they do best, and the rounds will play out and there will be a winner and a loser. Each game has 8 players and everybody starts with 100 HP, which you can see on the right side of the screen. As you battle with the other players, you will lose HP every time you lose. Now, the goal of the game is to be the last person standing with HP left. So whether you win the game with 80 HP or 1 HP, as long as you're the last person standing, you are the winner. Teamfight Tactics is very generous because in order to progress in the ranked system or to get more experience in the normal system, you actually only have to place in the top 4. A top 4 placement will progress you, whereas a bottom 4 placement will hinder your progression, or in the case of ranked, you will lose ranked points. The most progression points you get are for getting first place, and the most you will lose is for getting 8th place. Everything else falls somewhere in between. The game is structured into stages, and a good way to check at what stage you're at in the game is to look up here where I've highlighted in red. So at the beginning stages, a loss will not cost you that much HP, but as you go deeper into the game, you will lose more and more HP from each round you lose. As well as fighting other players, you will also encounter some AI critters and creatures that you're going to fight, and they contain champions, gold, other useful loot, and items that will help you make the strongest board possible. We will get into items a lot more in detail a little bit later. So that is the basic framework of the game. You have HP, you fight other players, you try to hang on to your HP for as long as possible. So how do we make that happen? Well, as I mentioned, this game involves champions, or sometimes they're referred to as units. You buy units as the game progresses to form the strongest team possible. Now, that doesn't mean every unit deals damage. Some are utility units that will offer crowd control or healing for your team. Some are tanks to tank damage from the other team. And then some deal massive amounts of damage. You might even say tons of damage. So every round, you will get a shop that will have 5 units or champions in the shop. They are all considered a 1-star unit. If you are able to find 3 of a kind, you can combine them to make a 2-star unit. A 2-star unit will have much improved base stats as well as power, and then it will still only take up 1 slot on your board, but it will do a lot more damage and be able to tank a lot more damage at the same time. As you can see here, you have a bench so that you can start saving up your copies of your units in order to combine them at a later time. Now, if you get really greedy, you can combine 3 2-star units to form a 3-star unit, which is extremely powerful, but also extremely difficult to obtain. For this video, we're just going to focus mostly on 2-star units because learning how to make 2-star units and what 2-star units you should be prioritizing each game is the most important beginner skill to look. 3-star units are great, but once you master 2-star units, it will become pretty clear how you progress to a 3-star unit. So while we are talking about the shop, there's a couple things I want to point out. Up above your shop, you will see the color-coded percentages. That is your chances to get each type of unit. 1-cost units are generally the weakest units, and 5-cost units are generally the strongest. At first, you will only see 1 to 2-cost units in your shops, but as you level up, which I will talk about in a second, you start to gain access to more and more units and more powerful units. All of them cost gold, which is going to be in my next tip because econ is possibly the most important thing in the game. And so we're going to talk about what econ is and what is so important about it in just a little bit. But for now, it's just important to know that you need gold to buy these champions. And if you are going to buy a 3-cost unit, it will cost you 3 gold. So to combine them into a 2-star unit, it will cost you 9 gold total. So what makes the shops allow you to buy more powerful units? Well, that is where experience comes in. So as you can see on the left of the shop, there is a little screen that shows you what level you are at, buying experience, and then also refreshing the shop, which I will get to in another tip. Your experience and level corresponds to how many units you can play on the board. So at level 1, you can play 1 unit. In level 2, you can play 2 units, all the way up to level 9, where you can have 9 units on the board. So you can see how that starts to really increase your odds of winning as you have more units. And not everybody levels up at the same time. You will naturally progress with a little bit of experience each round, so you naturally will hit higher levels as the game goes on. However, you can also buy 4 experience points for 4 gold to level up quicker, which could give you an advantage over your opponents. The last thing we are going to talk about is the left side of your screen with traits and classes. This is just a general framework of the game. So you know how we're trying to build a strong board and put more and more units on the board? Well, what units you put on also matter because some of the units will synergize with other units to unlock bonuses for either those specific units or your team as a whole. For example, there is a trait called Mystic that gives your entire team resistance to magic-based damage. So if you are facing a lot of opponents that are going to be building magic damage, it might be advantageous to put a couple Mystic units on the board to unlock that bonus for your team. How do you know if a team that you're facing is doing a lot of magic damage? Again, we will talk about that much later in the video. So this is the basic framework of the game. At this point, if you're still a little bit confused, that is okay because the next 4 tips are going to clarify all these different components and show you how they work together to make a really fun game that is not as complex and complicated as it first seems. There are so many layers to this game, so the reason it is important to start with these basics and really learn them well is because once they become second nature to you, you can start piecing together all the other little micro mechanics that are going to make you an extremely proficient player. Some people will just glaze over all of these and just start playing a bunch and making teams and buying units, and they might do okay, but when they start facing better players, they will start to struggle because they are not maximizing the base mechanics of the game. So by watching this video, you are already ahead of a lot of your opponents. So we are finally moving on to the second tip. Let's talk about the economics of Teamfight Tactics. As much as the cool units, abilities, and team synergies are, it is actually not the most important thing in the game. It's something as boring as gold and money. The gold system allows you to make choices in the game. Kind of like in real life, how money just seems to control everything, unfortunately. In this world, it is no different. The more money you have, the more choices you can make. And I'm going to go into all of the aspects of the economy, nicknamed econ, in this next tip. As you start the game, you will do some PvE rounds. So it's player versus environment. So basically, it's some computer-generated critters that I mentioned that you will face that will maybe give you item components, which are also important, but they might give you some gold as well. Each round, you also get a little bit of gold as well. And once you start facing the players, you are going to get a base 5 gold every single round, which doesn't seem like a lot, right? Luckily, there is a way to compound your earnings in the form of interest. For every 10 gold you have in your bank account at the end of a round, you will get 1 interest up to a maximum of 50 gold or 5 interest. So if you end your battle with 50 or more gold, you will now get 10 gold when you go into the next planning phase. As you can see, somebody that didn't save any gold up is only going to get 5 gold, and you will have double the gold that they have, which again allows you to make more choices of units to buy, buying experience, or re-rolling the shop. I will touch on this a bit later, but re-rolling the shop costs 2 gold, and what it does is it refreshes your shop and allows you to get 5 new units that you may want to buy. If you win multiple rounds in a row, or lose multiple rounds in a row, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but some people do choose to lose 5 or 6 rounds in a row, which is a more advanced tip. But if you consistently win multiple rounds in a row, you also get some bonus gold as well. So you can have up to 13 or 14 gold given to you in any given round. So the general rule of thumb at the beginning of the game is to try to get to 10 gold as fast as you can so that you can start gaining interest. Another common theme is that people try to get 50 gold as soon as possible to maximize your interest. However, in recent years, the mindset has shifted a little bit. 50 gold is great, and there's a lot of cases where you are going to want to hit that. But sometimes if you need to spend a little bit of gold to either level up or re-roll your shop to get a few more stronger units, it might benefit you a little bit more to spend some of your gold now. Again, the theory behind that is a little bit more advanced, so that will be in a more intermediate or advanced video. But one thing that I can recommend to you that I did when I started this game in set 1, the very first season of Teamfight Tactics, which I hope you do not do, is try to not ever have 0 gold. There are only a few situations where I ever recommend going to 0 gold, and that is basically if you are in a do or die situation where if you don't roll and get the units that you need, you are going to lose the next round, because gold is not going to help you if you are out of the game, of course. But if you do have especially less than 10 gold, the longer you stay in the game, the less and less choices you are going to have. Your other opponents that do have gold are going to have more choices, and more choices typically results in winning more rounds. There's no exact science to this, but overall, you want to balance your spending between experience, units, and saving your gold for interest. What I recommend in your first few games is to try at least once during the game to hit 30 gold and keep your gold above 30 for a few rounds. And then once you do that, I challenge you to try to get to 50 gold and keep your gold above 50 in more rounds. So here is where the real benefit of having over 50 gold comes in, and hopefully this is going to bring this all together for you. If you have over 50 gold, the max interest that you're going to get from your base 5 gold and your interest is 5 and 5, 10 gold. Are you with me? When you go into the next round, you're going to have something like 60 gold or 65 gold. You can use that gold to either buy experience, so you could buy 4 experience 2 times, spend your 8 gold, and still have over 50 gold left. Or you could re-roll your shop, see a couple units you want, buy them, and still have over 50 gold. This allows you to build your team while ensuring that you are still going to have as much money coming in as possible, because if somebody hits a very strong board and you start getting annihilated round after round, you can spend as much gold as you need from that 50 gold to level up, reroll for some 2-star units, things that will allow you to start winning the rounds or just losing by a little bit while you continue to search for items, units, and synergies. I'm actually not going to talk too much more about econ, even though we have covered a lot here. It is best to keep it simple at the beginning. You want to hit 10 gold as soon as possible so that you can start gaining interest. You don't want to leave yourself with no gold, and you want to try to maximize your gold so you have as many choices in the game as possible. Once you start feeling comfortable with all these principles, then you can add on other techniques to use your gold wisely, and honestly, it's a little bit of trial and error as well. Now we are going to go into the other most important thing about this game, and that are the champions themselves. Have you ever been playing TFT and played a couple games and then you came back to it months later and it seemed like you were starting completely over and nothing seemed familiar? Well, you are probably right. TFT changes their champion roster and lineup and theme of the entire set usually once every 3 to 4 months. If you don't play a lot, this can seem daunting, but for players that consistently play, it keeps things exciting and fresh. So every set, there are new champions with new abilities, new synergies, and new traits. And it might seem a little bit overwhelming because it kind of is, but there are so many resources to help you learn. They always do a big patch rundown on the Teamfight Tactics YouTube page, as well as Riot has a cheat sheet for all the traits, classes, and units as well. Then, of course, there are a lot of content creators and other websites that will help supplement this information to make things a little bit easier to understand and help you digest it a little bit quicker. So the units themselves, what do they look like? As you can see, when I'm refreshing the shop here, all the units have a different color scheme to them. Each cost of unit has their own unique color and look. So a 1 cost unit has a very plain, very minimalist background, and it is kind of like a dark gray charcoal color. 2 cost units look a little bit more fancy with a green jewel up top and a green background. Then we have 3 cost units that have a blue background with a triangular gem at the top. 4 cost units, a deep purple background and a hexagon shaped gem at the top. And then 5 cost units have the biggest, most proficient gem with a gold background. Even by the look of the unit in the shop, you can kind of get an indication of what the power level of that unit is. But the most important thing to remember when you're starting out is that each cost has the same background, as I mentioned, and that is a really good way to group champions together in terms of their power level. Like I mentioned before, finding duplicates of a champion also upgrades them into a higher power level. So if you find 3 2-cost units and then combine them into one, which it will do it automatically for you, don't you worry, it will transform into a 2-star unit and it will be much more powerful. Another tip is if your bench is full and you click and you need 2 more units to combine to 3 and you click them both really quickly, it will combine them automatically without you having to sell a unit from your bench, as there are limited spaces. Each unit also comes with its own classes or traits. Most units have 1 class, 1 trait, but there are some units that will have 3 traits or classes so that they can synergize well into a bunch of different compositions. As the cost of the unit gets higher, the less of them there are in the game. So when you see your shop, it is actually coming from a pool of champions that has a maximum limit in the game for all players combined. So if you see that somebody has a bunch of 2-star units of the same unit, the chances of that unit appearing in your shop go way down. 1 and 2 cost units have quite a few more champions in the pool. I'm putting this infographic up here so you can see the exact breakdown. As you get up to the 4 and 5 cost units, there are far less, so the chances that you are going to 2-star them is also less. They tend to make 2-star 4 and 5 cost units very powerful, as it is more difficult to obtain. When you're building your team composition, it is a good idea to include especially a 4 cost that is going to either be a really strong tank or a really strong source of damage, because that is the standard of a game, to have a higher cost carry, either 3, 4, or 5 cost. That already is getting a little bit more advanced than we're going in this video, but what you need to be aware of as soon as you are comfortable with buying champions and putting them into a 2-star, starting to get your synergies and traits online, which I'm going to talk about next, then you can start to really maximize what kind of team you have. So as you can see on the left side of the screen, we have all of our traits here. If they are inactive, which means you are not currently getting the bonus, they will show up on the left, but they will be in a very gray color, and you can see that you haven't hit the breakpoint yet. It'll say 1 out of 2, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, something like that. Once you put enough units of a synergy onto the board, it will unlock that trait, and once the trait comes online, it'll start at usually the bronze level, and then as you climb up the tree, so you hit 2, 4, 6, 8, it will change color to silver, gold, or prismatic, and that means you have a stronger bonus. If you hover over the trait itself, it will tell you what those bonuses are and at what breakpoints you will hit those bonuses. It's also really important to remember that if you have 2 of the same unit, so let's say you have 2 karmas, that will only count for 1 of the trait. It will not count as 2. It has to be its own unique unit. Some games you might only have a couple synergies unlocked. Some games you might have a ton unlocked. They all work differently together, but the main thing to know is that some compositions are stronger than others. Since everything changes set to set, I am going to cover all the abilities, traits, and classes in another video because it is more effective to go over what is current to this set. So stay tuned for that. Before we move on to items, I have 2 more tips for you that's going to really get you started in regards to playing around the units of the game. One is positioning, although this is actually a more complex idea than it seems, and there's a lot of different topics we could explore around positioning, which we'll cover in a different video. You can actually boil it down, especially at the beginner level, to 2 main points. Putting tanky, higher health, higher defense units with tank items on in the front 2 rows, and then your ranged damage dealers that have the damage items in the back 2 rows. That is how you position a board. Of course, there are many nuances to how to position better, depending on what items, what is more effective, but truly there's a lot of games, even in higher rank games, where for the first half of the game, I use very basic positioning and it does not affect my game whatsoever because I follow these simple principles. And so that is what I'm telling you. Just simplify it down at the start because it will allow you to focus on all the other things you need to learn. You can find the information such as attack range, health by clicking on the champion, and it will bring up a little infographic for you that will outline everything about the champion. As well, when you learn about all the classes, there are some classes such as Mystic that get more magic resistance, or units like Guardians that gain a shield when they get down to 50% health, which helps them survive longer. So take a look for things like that as well. And then the other thing that I think will really help you at the start of this game, it's going to help you get further into the games and last longer, is even if you don't think you're going to play a champ, at the start, if you find a couple of them, always buy them, because if you 2-star them and put them on your board temporarily, it will get you further into the game with enough HP to survive until you find the units you need. whenever I take a break from TFT and then I start playing again, I kind of do forget about that. And I only buy units that I think I'm going to play on my board. And then when I realize that, I have a very terrible board and I don't find the units I need, I could have survived a lot longer by 2-starring some of those units. So this is really important to do because you can always sell the unit for some gold back at a later time. All right, we are finally moving on to what makes the game, in my opinion, actually really fun, and that is items. This is actually going to be a very short section because there are so many variances, items set to set, and what is good at any given time. So I think it deserves its own video for the actual specific items to champions in this set. But there are some general principles that you can use for items that will help you build your team as strong as possible. So backing up for a sec, you actually start the game with a mad dash around a carousel that has a bunch of item components in it. We're going to get into what those mean in a second, but you actually pick items and everybody goes at once. In future rounds, the people that are actually the lowest HP get to select their item first. As the game goes on, the items get rarer and they change into full items so that you can get an entire item for one of your carries or one of your tanks. As I mentioned before, you can also obtain items from all the PvE rounds that will drop item components, gold, etc. So as you can see, there are all of these item components and they combine to make full items which give an effect, bonus, stats, or even auras to affect multiple champions. There are both damage components, such as the sword, rod, and glove, tank components, such as the chain vest and Negatron cloak, and then there's some utility items, such as the Tear of the Goddess and the Giant's Belt. Now, all of these items can be mix and match to make damage, utility, and tank items, and you can see here that by right-clicking one of the items, you can see what it builds into. So if you think about how many units there are with how many combinations for the item, the possibilities are infinite. There is what is called best in slot items, which work the best with a champion, but I find at the beginning, as long as you are building in general AD items or attack damage items on units that benefit from attack damage, AP items on units that benefit from magic damage, and tank items on your tanks, that is a good base starting point. And as you play more, you can see what worked well for you and what didn't, and then you can adapt from there. But by trying to learn every maximized efficiency item right at the start, I think that takes away from learning the actual game, and I think that is a big mistake that players make at the start of Teamfight Tactics. So how do you tell what items to build on a character at a glance? So if you go into your unit and you right click and look at their ability, it will be color coded based on what their attacks scale with. So it will say attack damage, but it will also show up in an orange font to indicate you're going to be doing physical damage. If it's in blue font and it has kind of like a little blue comet looking icon, that means it's going to do magic damage. Some champions scale with both, so you can build hybrid items on them or a little bit of both, and you're still going to do a little bit of damage. That's usually not optimal, but if you are panicking and not sure what to build, look for those colors and build accordingly. Again, with tank items, they're a little more forgiving because you can build tank items on any champion and it will make them tankier. However, tank-specific units have mechanics built into them to make those items let them tank more damage and last longer. So if you have a unit that's supposed to be a high damage unit, throw 3 tank items on them and put them in the front line. They probably won't survive too long. So it is important to make sure tank items are going on tanks, but what those items look like can vary game to game. All right, so let's move on to our last point, and this is going to be miscellaneous game mechanics that you should know right off the start. These few things are going to help you get through the first couple games, and then as you learn them, you can dive deeper and deeper into the set mechanics that are specific to that set, because they are changing all the time, so we have to be adaptable. The first one, since we were just talking about items, is the spatula. So that is an item component that can be used in a couple different ways. You can combine it with another spatula to make a tactician crown, and that allows you to place one additional champion on your board. So as we know, if you're level 7, you can have 7 champions, but if you use the tactician crown, you can actually place 8 champions. You can also combine it with the other item components to make an emblem, which will give you +1 to one of the traits. So if you're playing a game and there's a trait that requires 2, 4, or 6 champions, but there's only 5 in the game, how are you going to hit that last one? You can likely craft an emblem to get you to that 6th one. Because there are more classes and traits than there are item components, there are also some other ways of getting emblems that you can't craft otherwise. So that does come down to luck in the game, but there's the tome of traits that you can get in the game, and then if you drag it to your garbage can, it will bring up an armory of emblems that you can choose from, or sometimes later in the carousels, then you can grab one from there as well. So that is all I'm going to say about items. Items make the game so much fun, and there is so many interesting nuances and combos to use with the items, but if you are just starting TFT, what you need to know is 80 champions, 80 items, AP champions, AP items. It is truly that simple at the start, and then as you play, you can see what items really made a difference and what items didn't. So let's move on to our final topic, and that is all of the additional game mechanics that I think you need to know today. There are definitely more mechanics and strategies than are in this video, but as a beginner, these are the things that you are going to come across every game that I think you need to at least be aware of. Not perfect at, but aware of in order to succeed. So the first one is a relatively new permanent addition to the game. They've been around for a little while, but it was just announced in set 8 that augments are going to be a permanent part of the game, so we got to talk about it right now. Augments are basically a form of supplementing your team. So for example, if you don't have a lot of healing on your team, one of your augment choices that appear 3 times throughout the game, it might give your team some healing when they deal damage, so then you don't have to build a bunch of healing items. Or it might give you +1 to one of the traits that you're working towards. There are so many combinations of what you can do with augment, so here is my advice to you at a basic level. If you see an augment where it is specific to the trait that you're building, I say go for it. It might not even be the best one, but it's probably a decent option. Healing and gold ones are always great, where they're going to give you some instant gold, especially if you are running a little low or you know that you need to go to level 9 and you need the gold to get there. Those are all great choices. The more specialty augments, it truly is trial and error. You can definitely look up online what other people are playing and using, but I find that if you pick the most basic augments to start, and maybe every once in a while try one that seems fun and see how it affects your game, that's the best way to learn augments. Because it is somewhat new to the game, nobody is perfect at selecting augments, and some people might think they're picking the optimal augments, but because we haven't had that much of a time to test them out over and over and over, and they change season to season, like, just trust yourself. If you see one that you think looks good for your team, just go ahead and pick it. Another mechanic that was recently added is you can actually see who you have not fought yet in each stage. As I mentioned at the top, you can see which stage you're in. So each stage has a first half and a second half. Throughout that stage, you will fight people that you have not yet fought. So in the health bars, as you can see here, you can see that there are these cross swords. That means you are yet to fight them. So it's a good idea to look at who you're fighting next to see what their board looks like. You might be able to change your positioning. You might be able to, level up to beat them. It's not perfect because you can't guarantee who you fight next usually, but it is a good way to start, addressing the other players in the game. But I would say if you don't feel comfortable with this yet, just focus on your own board first. This will come later and it will come natural, because once you get absolutely smoked by a person that you have no idea what they built, you're going to want to look at their board anyways. So it does come naturally. So just take your time, learn the game. There are some more other game mechanics, but you might not necessarily encounter them every single game, or maybe not even in this set. So I think I'm going to leave it there, because I think this is going to give you a really good basis starting Teamfight Tactics. I also wanted to say that if you are wondering about absolutely anything after watching this video, or something that I didn't address but you've heard about, please ask me in the comments and I will 1000% answer you, because I think this is a great game and I think that it is accessible to new players in some ways, but I can see how is a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to learn. So ask me any questions in the comments and I will try to answer as best as I can. If after this video any of the points didn't make perfect sense, my other recommendation is to play a few games and then watch that section again, because as you play more, things will become more familiar and then you will start to pick up on these things that I'm saying. I also encourage you to go back and watch the initial team fight that we watched at the start of the video and see what things you picked out that you maybe didn't the first time around. And I know I said it was going to make a lot more sense and hopefully it's a little bit more clear, but I don't expect you to understand every single thing that went on at this point, because there's a lot of positioning choices, a lot of team composition things that are in play, but you will get there. But I tell you now, if you just focus on these basic mechanics, you will start to learn the game, and then you can start adding in all these other things to make you an absolute beast. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Again, please like, subscribe, comment if you feel like it, and I will be coming at you with way more content regarding TFT, some guides, some videos, some commentary, all that stuff. So stay tuned.